Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to kind of go over a little bit about why people commit suicide and some statistics about suicide. One of the things that really needs to be discussed in our medical field is more and more suicide. And given the corona lock-in, there's going to be a lot more people who are going to be looking to suicide as an answer to their problem, because we are facing more than just a pandemic. We're facing an economic crash the likes of this country hasn't seen since the 20s. So since the 1920s, when we had our big economic crash. So stick with me for just a few minutes here, and we're going to go over a few things, and we're going to talk about a few things. So welcome here, and let's get started with discussing some of the things and some of the facts about suicide and what causes suicide. So, did you know that worldwide, every year worldwide, we have an average of over 800,000 people that kill themselves every year worldwide? Suicide is the 15th leading cause of mortality and accounting for 1.5% of all deaths in the world. You know, more people die from suicide than murders. But yet, you know, the media sources do not cover the suicide like they should. They don't cover it and make it a media mainstream. What they do is they cover the murders, but they do not cover the mainstream. And because they're not covering, you know, the suicide, putting suicide in mainstream to make more awareness about it, it's not that people are not that aware about it. You know, now we have a statistical risk, and we have way more to fear from a love affair than we do sharks. And that's kind of saying a whole lot, because in a love affair, you know, one party or the other could lead. You know, if the love affair goes bad, then one or the other of the parties could, you know, seek suicide as an answer. And that is not the answer ever. Suicide is never the answer to your problems. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a love affair gone bad or whatever it is. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in Europe lists as the cause of suicide breaks down as follows. 45% of suicide is due to brain disorders, you know, chemistries in the brain. And the other 55% breaks down into a whole lot of things. But 10% of the 55% is money woes. You know, people that are struggling financially, they tend to eventually reach a depression point to where they're so depressed that they feel like the only option they have left to get out of this struggle financially is to commit suicide. That is not going to be the answer. The other 33% of that out of the 55% is romantically based issues. Generally, romance takes a good portion, you know, of the 55% that's left. The rest is things like status quo, loss of hope, and then there's an area that's just other things. You know, could be physical, could be the person is already physically ill and dying, and they choose suicide as their option to get out from suffering with all that pain. So, you know, poverty and illness and aging, kind of, you know, you have different reasons for that. You know, poverty has an effect. You know, when you're in poverty, you don't have money to buy food. You don't have money to buy, you know, the things that you need to live your life. When you're sick, it's another section. It's you don't have the money to buy the medicines you need. You don't have the money to buy, you know, things like that, you know, clothing. You know, you don't have the financial situation to take care of that. And then as you get older, you go through the depression of your children grow up, they leave the nest, they don't necessarily communicate like they used to communicate every single day. They grow a little bit more distance as the years go by, which leads to thoughts of depression and thoughts of killing oneself, which is still, again, not the answer. And then there is a question of what causes other people. There's so many unknowns because, suicide, when it takes place, catches everybody off guard. Nobody was expecting someone to commit suicide, and nobody knows how to deal with it, because the first question everybody has is, why? Why did this person commit suicide? This person was such a happy person. This person was, so lucky. This person, it's all a facade. Everybody puts on that facade. And because they're putting that facade on, they don't let people see what's really hurting them or eating at them. They hide their true self behind that front place facade. From the causes of suicide, we learn how intensely we need to have the following things on a daily basis: love, self-acceptance, meaning, hope, status. Status is very important. Pride, and ultimately forgiveness. Because maybe there's something that we feel we've not been forgiven for that's driving our thoughts of suicide. And the thoughts of suicide are not always, the best thing in the world, but they are what they are. People think of it. And I've been there, done that. And I've learned to cope, learned to deal with. Why I don't have a reason to do it anymore is because I've learned. Now, I will say that, there are some books that people should read so that we gain a little bit better understanding of suicide and how suicide over the years has been in the mainstream but not kept in the mainstream. In 1856, there was a book that was written called Madame Bovary, I believe it's how it's pronounced. And that book dealt with respect and forgiveness. And if she had gained the respect she needed, she would not have had felt the need to commit suicide. If she'd have been forgiven for her indiscretion, she would not have committed suicide. She would have been able to go on with her life. Now, of course, everybody, knows that in 1599, the story of Hamlet, the respect, the forgiveness, and, of course, ultimately, love. Those things were missing from Hamlet's life. He was not receiving the respect he needed. He was not given any forgiveness. And he did not receive the love that he needed from his family and his supporters. And then in 1877, we have Anna Karenina. The same applies to her, except with her, she had no purpose and she had no significance. And because of those reasons, it drove her to commit suicide. And, the one thing that makes suicide completely bewildering is that element of surprise. The surprise is evidence of an unwitting neglect of one another and our own selves, because we tend to forget that there are others in our lives that will hurt when we commit suicide. Now, we're reluctant to afford our needs to the attention of suicide. Now, Arthur Schopenhauer in 1818 said, "We should always be mindful of the fact that no man or woman is ever very far from the state in which he or she would readily want to seize a sword or poison in order to bring his or her existence to an end." That's very powerful. It really says that, everybody walking, every person has that button that once it's pushed, it's hard for someone to turn it back off. Because once that thought is there, you've got to have a support system in place. You've got to have people that love you, that know that you're going through a really bad time, not to leave you alone, not to give you that opportunity to grab the sword and fall upon it, or take poison to poison yourself to end your existence. You know, it is very telling that in some countries have higher rates of suicide than others. You know, we owe each other and ourselves so much more compassion than we currently tend to give. You know, we don't give ourselves enough compassion to ourselves or to each other. We tend to be very negative towards people we don't know. And because we're very negative towards that, it is not something that people fully understand why a person would go down this path. Well, if the society you're in only gives you negativity, then you have a hard time finding love and respect and acceptance. And acceptance is not just from your peers. You have to accept yourself. You have to be able to accept who you are and understand that no matter what, you are a person who is deserving of love, deserving of life. Your life is important because you have a mission in this world, not to help people or to be helped by people or even to just be here, be a part of this wonderful world that we live in. We have so many things and so many reasons to be in this world and be happy. That is the reason why this video is being made, because I want people to find their inner peace and that reason to be very happy with themselves, with the world they live in, and everything. Now, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention reports that every day there's 123 people die by suicide per day inside the United States. White males account for 69.67% of all suicide deaths. Firearms account for 50.57% of the way people commit suicide. So, you know, suicide is still the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. In 2018, 48,344 Americans died by suicide, and 1.4 million attempts were made. 14.2 per 100,000 people either attempt suicide or commit suicide or just think of suicide. So what I'm telling you is there are ways to get help. There are ways to come to terms with loss, with heartbreak, and ways to realize that life has meaning, has purpose, has hope, and has love. Because you are loved, whether you realize it or not. God loves you, and the people around you love you. You may be suffering from psychological issues. Well, there is medication that helps with a lot of those. There are things that will help you keep from going off that deep end and thinking that the only answer is to commit suicide. You know, as I said before, been there, done that. I'm on medication that helps me keep myself calm and helps me understand that there are other reasons. And as I said in my other video, suicide is not the answer. I now stand in front of a mirror whenever I even begin to feel depression coming on, and I look in that mirror and I imagine everyone around me, and the one shining light that really stands out is all my family members and then my granddaughter. What would my granddaughter be like? What would her life be like without her pawpaw? She loves her pawpaw to death. She follows me around. She climbs up in my lap all the time. She is that shining light. And without her love and her consistent persistence of climbing all over me, wanting my attention, wanting to be a part of whatever I'm doing, I would feel lost. I would feel like I didn't have reasons sometimes. Even looking in a mirror, you have to look in that mirror and you have to find that one person that stands out in that group that you can imagine in your mind and say, there's my focus of a reason why I should not commit suicide. For me, of course, it was my granddaughter, because she's too young to understand, but she's yet old enough to know that, hey, wait a minute, where's Pawpaw if something were to happen? So I implore you that if you have thoughts or if you are depressed, do not feel ashamed. Do not feel that you have to hide it. Seek medical attention. Seek help. And God bless, and have a wonderful evening.